Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk to you about how annoying it is when books are out of print. So this is a video I've been thinking about doing for a while. One of the things that sparked the thought for doing it in my mind was the review I did for The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which I put up a little while ago. So if you watched that, you'll know that I commented in that video that it seemed annoying to me that William Goldman had written, so far as I can tell, I think 15 or 16 novels, but only about 3 of them still seem to be in print today. And Goldman, obviously, was a very big name in screenwriting, less well known as a novelist, but he did have some big hits with Magic is one of his that was a big hit, and The Marathon Man, which obviously he wrote the screenplay for the movie of as well. Some quite big popular novels. And it seems bizarre to me that none of his other books, so those 2 are still in print, but none of his other books are. And what I can't figure out is, in the modern world, when it's so easy to publish books digitally, so to publish books on Kindle, why is it that so many books from previous decades seem to have fallen out of print? Because it's very, very easy to publish a book. I've published books in the past. It's dead easy. So I don't think there's an excuse for publishers to not make books like that available digitally. I can see why they might not want to print physical copies of them, because they might think they're not going to sell, but why not make them available digitally? If anyone out there knows the answer, please do let me know. And there are a lot of other authors I can think of whose work seems to be very difficult to come by. So another example would be Robert Heinlein. So I was I was reading an article the other day about his book The Puppet Masters, which was originally published, I think, in one of the big sci-fi magazines in the States, and then as a serial, and he then made it into a novel. So far as I can tell, that book isn't available in the UK anymore. I could find second-hand copies of it, but they were all quite expensive. Evan Hunter, a favourite author of mine, so also known as Ed McBain, author of the 87th Precinct series, which you can see behind you there. He wrote many books as Evan Hunter. Some of them are available, to buy in the UK new today, but many of them aren't. And indeed, the 87th Precinct series, there are 55 books in the series, and I can't remember off the top of my head the stats, but there are some, the majority of them, like 50 of them, you can buy. So Amazon have got the rights for them for one of their publishing arms, and you can buy them on Kindle and physically as well. But not all of them. There are a few that aren't available. And I suspect with the 87th Precinct books that's partly because McBain, through the course of that series, which was written over several decades, skipped between different publishers. So different publishers probably have the rights, or had the rights to different books. And Amazon clearly have managed to get many of them, but not all of them. And I'm assuming that there is one publisher out there who had the rights at some point, who is holding off and is not releasing the rights, which just seems annoying, doesn't it? So another example. So I was reading this the other day. The Collected Pulp Horror, which is fantastic. I thoroughly recommend it. And I do a daily video for my patrons on Patreon. And I put up saying I was reading this. And one of my patrons, Robbo, commented that this book, Spawn of Satan, by Charles Birkin, is fantastic and contains the most disturbing short story he's ever read, which is called I've Got a Lovely Bunch of Coconuts, or maybe it's just A Lovely Bunch of Coconuts. And I've subsequently managed to read a kind of brief description of what the story's about, and it does sound really disturbing. I'm really keen to read it. Now, of course, Spawn of Satan is not in print anymore. You can't get it. You can buy second-hand copies, but the cheapest I could find was like 30 quid, and I'm not going to pay 30 quid for an old book. There are 2 short story collections by Charles Birkin which are in print, which have been republished recently by Valancourt Books, who do the Paperbacks from Hell series, and are really good at finding old vintage stuff and republishing it. But sadly, neither of those collections has A Lovely Bunch of Coconuts in it. So I may give those a try anyway, because they sound good, but I'm desperate to get hold of a copy of this, and no one's publishing it. And I think, when you look at books that are available, clearly there's a drop-off point where books fall into the public domain. And as soon as that happens, you find copies of them on Project Gutenberg and places like that. So, people go through the process of digitising the book from an old paperback copy and make it available. But something like this, which is not in the public domain, but nobody wants to publish for whatever reason, you can't get. So there's this big gap. There's stuff that's and it's different. The rules are different in different countries, aren't they? But stuff that's more than, I guess, 70 or 80 years old, which you can get. Maybe it's a bit more than that. Maybe it's 100 years. But the stuff that is in the public domain you can get, and then you can get recent stuff, and then you get selected books from that period in between. So books that publishers still feel it worthwhile to publish. So recently it's interesting, isn't it? We've had all the furore about the Agatha Christie books, which have been continuously in print since they were first published, and where the publishers are now feeling that there are things in those books that modern audiences might not find acceptable, and they're actually paying someone to edit those books. Now there's loads of books, hundreds, thousands of books in a similar vein, so kind of cozy mysteries, published at the same time as those Agatha Christie books, which have fallen out of print, and nobody cares about. I'm sure it would be very easy for a publisher to get the rights to them and republish them, and not maybe not even have to worry about getting sensitivity readers in and re-editing them. But they don't do that because they're not a big name. And similarly, with some of the big names like I've talked about, like Hunter and Goldman, it's the books that are notable from them that caused a splash at the time that are still available, and not even necessarily caused a splash at the time. I think one of the things that makes it much more likely that a book will remain in print is if there's been a popular movie of it. So when I think about Hunter, one of the books of his that's still in print is The Black Book Jungle, which was a really big movie. And similarly with Goldman, Magic was a movie, and Marathon Man was a movie, and indeed The Princess Bride was a movie. Another author who was fantastically successful in his day, and his day wasn't that long ago, is Peter Benchley. So best known for Jaws, which is still in print. I think all of his other books are out of print now. And he wrote, a load of different things, all kind of riffing on the success he had with Jaws. So, he did like a, what's it called? Beast, I think, which is about a giant squid and stuff like that. But, fun, entertaining reads. None of them any worse than Jaws. And yet they're not in print anymore. You can't get them. Even on Kindle, you can't get them. And, Kindle, it's easy to print on, easy for publishers to make books available on. So why is it? And I suspect some of it is down to it just feeling like hard work. So not the actual act of publishing, but the act of getting the rights. Now, some of these books, the rights will still sit with the publishers who are choosing not to publish them. But there will be some, and I suspect that the Charles Birkin book may be an example of that, where because the author has died, there's some sort of complexity with their estate, which means that it's not easy for a publisher, it's not really straightforward for a publisher to get the rights and publish the book. And another really good example of that, who's someone whose books very suddenly fell out of print recently, is Guy and Smith. So Guy and Smith, really popular British horror author in the 70s and 80s particularly. If you went onto Amazon like 5 years ago, a lot of his books were available digitally. So like the Crab series and things like that, you could get digitally. But now you can't. The only ones you can get now are ones that were published right near the end of his life, which were new books that were published, with a particular publisher. So things like there's a Sabbath book 6, I think you can get, and there's a Crabs one as well, the Carnal Caves or the Charnel Caves or something like that it's called. So those ones you can get because I guess the rights are simple for those. He negotiated a contract with the publisher, and that contract is still in place effectively, even though Smith has died. But I think that there is. I suspect there's a load of complexity around the other books of his that have been republished digitally, because he's now died and isn't around to make decisions about it. That means they're not, they're now not available, which is a real shame because he's not he was never the best author in the world, but his books are really, really good fun. And what that means is if you go onto eBay and try and find Guy and Smith books, they're going for, silly money now, like, 20, 30 quid for what is probably quite a trashy paperback. So it feels a real shame to me, and it did make me wonder how difficult would it be for an individual, so for someone like me, to try and get the rights to one of these books and publish it. And I know that people have done this in the past. So Troy Treadup, who was briefly a booktuber, had a fantastic channel, self-published his own book, The Forsaken Boy, which is excellent, a werewolf novel. But he also, for a period of time, published books by Michael McDowell. So Michael McDowell, author of Blackwater, which I've talked about on the channel before, and a load of other great horror books from the kind of 70s and 80s, who died very young, and his books had fallen out of print. Now, many of them are now in print again through Valancourt, who I mentioned earlier, but I know that for a period of time, Troy had the rights to those books, and he published them. So clearly it's possible to do. And I did wonder if it would be an interesting exercise to try and get the rights to something like Spawn of Satan, and republish it. I have no idea how to do it. If anyone out there thinks it's a good idea and wants to give me some tips, then please feel free to. I'm not promising I'll do it, but it does feel like it'd be an interesting thing to do, and a service as well, because there are so many wonderful books that just, you just can't get nowadays unless you're willing to pay loads of money for a tatty old paperback copy. And it just annoys me. Partly it annoys me because I do prefer reading digitally now, because I just haven't got room for books. And if I want to read some of these these older books, A, I have to pay a lot of money for them, and B, I have to store them somewhere. So yeah, digital will definitely be my preference. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling there, but do let me know in the comments what you think. Okay, time for a random book from the shelf. So today's is a book that is out of print, and a fairly recent book that's out of print. So this is The Second Suspect by Heather Lewis, author of Notice. So this book came out in 1999. It's no longer available. I suspect it only had a few print runs, which is a shame because it's good. It's a really solid mystery. Just as good as many of the mysteries you can go out and buy today. But yeah, sadly out of print. So I hope you found that interesting. As I say, do let me know in the comments what you think. If you know why so many books are out of print, is it just that the rights get complicated, as I suspect, or is it something else? So yeah, do let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.